Everyone, in this video, we'll be talking a bit about the social sciences. What are they? How do they work? Why do we study them? And defining media and talking about the relationship between social sciences and media. So to start, we're going to talk about some of the concepts surrounding social sciences and then talk about what mass media is and then how it relates to the social sciences. So to start off, I would say that the social sciences are kind of a big umbrella topic where there's lots of subcategories underneath it. You can think of psychology, sociology, economics, anthropology, geography, political science, public health, history, and of course, communication. All is falling under the umbrella of social sciences. The thing that they all have in common is that we're trying to figure out, what are people doing? Why are they doing it? How can we predict what they're going to do in the future? And how might we maybe intervene with that to try to get people to behave in certain ways? So we're trying to understand the world around us from the lens of what are people doing and why are they doing it? And another thing that these social sciences all have in common is that we all have the same epistemology. Epistemology is basically the way that you decide what is true and what is not true. There are different ways to do that. For example, some people like to figure out what is true by digging deeply into their own personal experiences. Like if I've experienced this, it's probably true. Other people like to really dig into what is true by looking at a variety of evidence from other people's experience, or maybe data from peer-reviewed research studies. There are lots of different ways to try to come about answering the question, what is true, what is real, what is correct? And in the social sciences, we have one specific way that we do that. And so that's one of the reasons why people take GE courses in a variety of fields, is that hopefully you'll be learning how we do this in the social sciences versus the humanities and the natural sciences and philosophy, and find out that there are so many different ways to do this. But the epistemology that we focus on in the social sciences is that we first agree that there is an objective reality. And you could have a reasonable conversation about whether there is an objective reality. You could have a reasonable conversation about are there alternative dimensions? Is anything real? Like this book I'm holding in my hand, is it real or is this just some kind of illusion? You can have reasonable conversations about those kinds of things, but we don't have those conversations in the social sciences, because if we did, we wouldn't get anywhere. Instead, we focus on this epistemology where we make an assumption that there is an objective reality. The book is real, that there are right and wrong answers to what's happening in the world. So that is the epistemology that we are going to be working with in this class. And so what we are doing with our epistemology is that we are focusing on the idea of evidence. So we're going to gather evidence from a wide variety of sources to try to figure out what is actually happening in the objective reality around us. We're not just focused on making guesses or our thoughts or feelings or philosophy. Those things are wonderful, but save those for other courses. We're really focused on evidence, is the kind of epistemology that we are focused on here. Let me give you an example. And for this example, let's go to the club. So this is you dancing at the club, and you're like, oots, 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 and your friend is there too, and he's dancing like oots, 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 and your other friend is dancing. And as y'all are at the club dancing, having a good time, another creature comes in and starts dancing, and it is this kitten. So that's unusual, and that is what we are considering our objective reality. This kitten came into the club and started dancing. And after you left the club the next day, you're talking to your friend Fred, and Fred wants to know what actually happened. What is the objective reality of what happened here? And so you are going to be providing him with lots of kind of evidence. Maybe Fred is actually like a police officer and he is trying to really figure out what happened because this kitten is like a world-renowned thief. He's stolen the crown jewels or whatever. So Fred is really, really trying to figure out what is the objective reality of what happened. Lots of different evidence that you can give Fred. First of all, there's your eyewitness accounts. You and your friends, you all saw the dancing kitten, and you can tell Fred about that. You can explain what you saw, and you each probably saw the kitten from a different perspective. Maybe you saw the kitten from the front when they first arrived, and your other friend saw the kitten right before they left. So you all have these different perspectives that you're adding in. Those are bits of evidence. Maybe you want to collect more evidence. For example, if you've ever been around cats, they drop hair everywhere. So maybe you can collect samples of the dropped fur to do a DNA analysis on it. Maybe the kitten left little paw prints all over the place, and you can take a look at those paw prints. And so you're gathering all this evidence to really help Fred understand what is the objective reality of what happened. Now, with all this evidence, Fred probably won't get the exact perfect picture of what happened. He might be seeing something a little more like this. So remember, this is the objective reality. This is what actually happened, but maybe this is what Fred's imagining. He's close. He's not quite right, but he's close. And that's our goal. We are unfortunately not going to be able to use the social sciences to get a 100% correct picture of what's happened in the past and what's happening right now. The world is just too complicated for that, but we want to come as close as we can. And so by evaluating that kind of evidence, we can get really, really close. But let's say that Fred had a different epistemology. Maybe he doesn't want to rely on evidence. He doesn't care about your DNA samples or paw prints or eyewitness testimony. Maybe Fred has the kind of epistemology where he thinks, I've never seen a cat like that in this town before. I personally have seen a lot of rabbits. So I think you guys maybe saw a rabbit and thought that it was a cat. You can have a reasonable debate about the value of Fred's thoughts and feelings. But again, we're not doing that in this class, because with our epistemology that we're focused on to put some kind of boundaries on this class, we are focusing on the idea that there is an objective reality, and we are using evidence to try to figure out what that is. So if you've presented Fred with all this evidence about what happened, and he has a choice between writing up his report, this way versus this way, if he chooses to write about the rabbit, we're going to go ahead and say that Fred is wrong, that is not the best representation of reality as we can get. So that's obviously a silly example, but the same concept can be applied to very real, very relevant issues in the world that we are living in today. For example, an issue that we are trying to deal with is gender inequality with salaries. So to figure that out and what to do about it, we first have to know what is the objective reality. Are women being paid less than men for the same jobs? If so, is that happening across the board, or are there only certain jobs that that's happening in? That's an important question that we need to think about. Another one is disinformation. So we know that there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation in the media, and that can have really negative effects on citizenship. But what do we do about that? We can censor disinformation, but censorship comes with its own problems as well. So we have to really look at all the evidence to make difficult decisions about the real world around us. And that is how we do it in the social sciences. So goal number one is that we are trying to figure out what is the objective reality. We have to also keep in mind, though, that we need to update this all the time. We get better and better at figuring out what the objective reality is. So we have to take new information, incorporate it into what we already know. And that's one of the best skills that you can have as a scholar, is to update your beliefs when presented with new information. So your epistemology, how you believe what is true or what is not true, affects what you think is the objective reality of the world that we are living in today. But so does mass media. So the media that you are exposed to, TV shows, newspapers, social media, they impact what you think is happening in the world. And also, though, your epistemology affects what kind of media you're exposed to. So if you really like evidence, you probably are exposing yourself to media that has evidence. If not, then you probably are choosing different media. So I wanted to mention that all these things are very much related to each other. How you come to believe what is true affects your view of what the objective reality is, but it also affects what kind of media you choose. the media that you choose to engage in affects your view of reality and vice versa. So these things are all related to each other. Now, what are we talking about when we're talking about media? Essentially, we're talking about messages that are created for more than one person. So, an example of that might be photography. This is a weird little polar bear. But what we find is that there's a lot of environmental photography that does have an effect on people's decision making about environmental issues. How about radio? That's certainly a form of mass media. It's not as popular today as it used to be, but people do still listen to the radio sometimes. It's a message that was intended for more than one person. Certainly, print news is still available today. I like this example, breathing oxygen linked to staying alive. I recently saw another article that said, the key to not falling is improving your balance. And it's like, yeah, that's very obvious. If you just read the title, you'd think that that was the dumbest article ever. It actually had some really good, really interesting information in it about the relationship between balance and falling and how to improve your balance, but you never would have known that from the title. Certainly, social media plays a big role in our lives today. As do blogs. I like cooking blogs. Music is a form of mass media because that's intended for a wide audience. So is public speaking. Public speaking, debates, things like that. That is something that we are counting as media. And podcasts, which is basically like the new version of the radio, I suppose. So those are all examples of media. Now let's talk about our second goal in the class, which is to talk about how our epistemic beliefs and engagement with mass media impact our knowledge of the objective reality. So, like we said, your epistemology has an effect on what you think is real, and the media that you engage in has an effect on what you think is real. And your epistemology and mass media interact with each other as well. All these things together are going to have an impact on your decision making and behaviors as a citizen. So let's talk a little bit more about that, what it is and why it matters. I want to share with you a couple different examples of issues just that kind of point out why these kinds of things matter. Let me pull them over one at a time. One of the reasons why mass media matters for citizenship is that it can have an effect on actual policy. For example, I have an example of an article here where Texas has been pushing to remove information about America's history with slavery from textbooks. I think that history is really important, in part because I teach history, so I see how having a shared understanding of what happened in the past that got us to the world that we're living in today is really important for us to make decisions about the world that we're living in today. So there are many examples of how learning about history is really important for the world that we live in today. This is just one such example. Another reason why it matters is that if we really look deeply at our objective reality, we see some things that we may not want to see, but that we need to make the world a better place. An example of that is that the NFL used to use a person's race to determine how much compensation they should receive for injuries. And it was a pretty racist policy. And, you know, if we live in a world where our epistemology is like, I don't want racism to be real, so I want to pretend that it isn't, that's not actually improving the world we live in. So that's not a positive citizenship behavior per se. But if we take a hard look at the very real reality, we can make better decisions about our engagement with media for citizenship. Another example is that social media can have very, very positive impacts on the world that we live in, but it can have some negative impacts as well. For example, groups like this incel movement that are very anti-woman, they can get together online and create some really negative effects that can play a role in getting people killed. Another example is healthcare. We'll talk about what it means to have citizenship access, but one of those is access to shared resources such as healthcare. And so the way that transgender people are portrayed in the media can have an effect on how much the public supports policies that provide healthcare to people with different health issues. Here's another one about the right to health care that you might be interested in. By the way, these short little things that I'm showing you, none of those are going to be on the quizzes. I'm just showing you these as examples of some of the many topics that we're talking about. Another example, the media is important for holding public figures accountable. You know, a lot of politicians, for example, are receiving tons of money from foreign governments, and we need to know about that. So those are some examples of the importance of studying the social sciences and media and the effects that those have. I wanted to also share with you some examples of how we do it. One of them gets back to that topic with the incel movement. And this is an example of a content analysis where people are looking at what is actually happening in social media, because we can't make some good decisions about what to do about it until we know what's actually happening. So this group of people did a content analysis where they were looking at social media communication of people online in the incel movement to find out exactly like what were they talking about. Another example that I wanted to share with you is that we do in the social sciences spend a lot of time defining concepts, and that's really important for the way that we study the social sciences because it keeps us all on the same page. And an example of that maybe not going very well is this book, White Rural Rage, that has been criticized quite a bit by other professors. So some professors wrote the book, and a lot of professors are criticizing the book. And one of the big criticisms they have about the book is that the authors didn't give a solid definition of rural. And so we all kind of know what that means, but it can have a different meaning to different people. And what we find is depending on how you define rural, you find really big differences in trying to describe what people are like, how they vote. And we find that if you don't have a very good definition, you end up stereotyping. And stereotyping is not a good way to learn about or understand our objective reality. So it is really important that we provide those definitions. One example that I wanted to share with you, coming from someone who I think just did a really good job of taking a topic and breaking it down and studying it through a variety of lenses, especially in the social sciences, is Dr. Danielle Allen, who wrote this book, Democracy in the Time of Coronavirus. If you're interested in it, it's only 100 pages long, so it's a pretty quick read. But I feel like this book, when I read it, I thought this is such a good example of social sciences in action and how they relate to citizenship issues. First of all, she had a clear topic that she stayed focused on throughout the entire book. Second, when she started the book, she first started talking about the historical and cultural context. So that's what we do. We define the concepts and then we put them into context. And she gave some really nice examples of historical context about how big events can happen in the world that end up shaping the future in pretty significant ways. And one example that she gave was about how Rome, in the old days of Rome, was going to war with some other areas. And so they built roads to facilitate the war because they needed to transport, people and weapons and supplies to these different places. So they built the roads for the war. But when the war was over, those roads were still useful for society. So I thought that was a really interesting way to take a look at something that happened for one particular reason and how it transferred into changing the future. Another thing that she did in this book that I think really exemplifies the social sciences is that she focuses a lot on goals. I think out of my interpretation of this book, I think she spent like 50-60% of the book talking about shared goals. And that's so important because a lot of people, when they're having conversations about citizenship issues, they're arguing sometimes because they haven't even first established what is the goal. So if we start by establishing what our goal is, then we can have some discussions about the best way to achieve the goal. But if we haven't even managed to come up with one coherent goal that we're working towards, it really isn't useful to take the conversation any further. Once she establishes the goal, she talks about some steps that we can take to achieve that goal. And she doesn't talk about her thoughts or feelings. She provides very clear, concrete evidence to show this could actually work. So if you're ever looking for an example, I really enjoyed that book. Objective Reality Cat, thanks to you for your time, and I will see you in the next video.